Fire is a force of nature and can cause massive and rapid destruction. But for me, it is a driving force. It's a force that wakes me up at night, that brought me here, that when I missed my warm island or the subway sounds of the Bronx, it kept me going. For me, it was my children. It was my parents, and now my grandchildren. They remind me why I have to keep going, why I cannot stop, why I have to lead the way for others. It's also an idea. This idea that I have burning inside, that when I share it with people, I light up, and it keeps me up at night because I just keep dreaming of what it would look like when it comes to fruition and how many lives it's going to impact. For me, my fire is a place that reminds me of the people that love me and where I came from. It's like when I drive up to New York and I see the George Washington Bridge, I all of a sudden kind of like lean back a little bit. That subway station reminds me, to channel my inner J-Lo. The attitude of a Bronx girl just comes out oozing. It's when I cross the Caribbean and I land on an island full of culture and rich food. And I have that burning sun from Puerto Rico just diving down on me. And I hear a voice, my mother, reminding me that she is Nitza, the OG, and that my name is Nitzalis. But I ask you, what is the fire that drives you? What keeps you going? What wakes you up at night? More importantly, how do you use that light to light the path for others? And I challenge you to ask yourself a deeper question. What happens when your light is dimming? When your flames are running low? How do you fuel the fire within? Earlier this month, I was faced with frustration. I wanted to advocate and share what I was experiencing and didn't know where or to whom. I called this friend of mine. Ironically, we crossed paths in school. I was exiting and she was entering. We have never worked together. And I said, hey girl, look, I need your help. I need some tips for public speaking, the irony. I'm facing this challenge. I know you advocated. I know you stood in front of many and shared what you were experiencing and how you were fearful and how you were frustrated. I need that. All of a sudden, she stays quiet, and I'm over here like, come on, I'm ready. Give it to me. And she says, Nita, did you forget who you are? Did you forget your purpose? You have a gift. You have the ability to be a voice for those that do not have it, that cannot stand up for each other, for themselves. You were born to speak up. Man, did that shake me up from the inside. Sometimes, as women, we are putting out so many fires at home with children, in business, in our community, with our families. And sometimes our flames run low. And what do? We find a friend to nurture our flames. We find a friend that is going to remind us of who we are. Today, if any of you are running low, if your flames are dimming, if your light is not shining, let me be that person. Let me be the person to tell you, keep fighting. Don't you dare give up. You are a warrior. Call it whatever you want. Call it determination, grit, call it perseverance, or in some cases, just pure stubbornness. But you must keep going. Not you should, not you could, none of that. You must keep going. If you find yourself needing someone to fuel your fire, let me be the one to remind you. You were born to burn bright. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nitsa, for fueling that fire within each of us. Now it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about a video we're going to watch here. And it's interesting that she was talking about a fire, because this talk is by Caroline Paul, who is a former firefighter, who took a risk, believing in herself. She pivoted from one career to another, left firefighting to start a job as writing, and in the process became a best-selling author. Her talk, entitled "To Raise Brave Girls, Encourage Adventure," we will hear how to spark a little bit of productive risk-taking and raise confident girls. Please enjoy the video and be inspired.
When I was a kid, I was obsessed with the Guinness Book of World Records. And I really wanted to set a world record myself. But there was just one small problem. I had absolutely no talent. So I decided to set a world record in something that demanded absolutely no skill at all. I decided to set a world record in crawling. Now, the record at the time was 12 and a half miles. And for some reason, this seemed totally manageable. I recruited my friend Ann, and together we decided we didn't even need to train. And on the day of our record attempt, we put furniture pads on the outside of our good luck jeans, and we set off. And right away, we were in trouble, because the denim was against our skin and it began to chafe, and soon our knees were being chewed up. Hours in, it began to rain. Then, Ann dropped out. Then, it got dark. Now, by now, my knees were bleeding through my jeans, and I was hallucinating from the cold and the pain and the monotony. And to give you an idea of the sufferfest that I was undergoing, the first lap around the high school track took 10 minutes. The last lap took almost 30. After 12 hours of crawling, I stopped, and I had gone 8.5 miles. So I was short of the 12.5-mile record. Now, for many years, I thought this was a story of abject failure. But today, I see it differently. Because when I was attempting the world record, I was doing three things. I was getting outside my comfort zone, I was calling upon my resilience, and I was finding confidence in myself and my own decisions. I didn't know it then, but those are not the attributes of failure. Those are the attributes of bravery. Now, in 1989, at the age of 26, I became a San Francisco firefighter. And I was the 15th woman in a department of 1,500 men. And as you can imagine, when I arrived, there were many doubts about whether we could do the job. So even though I was a 5'10", 150-pound collegiate rower, and someone who could endure 12 hours of searing knee pain, I knew I still had to prove my strength and fitness. So one day a call came in for a fire, and sure enough, when my engine crew pulled up, there was black smoke billowing from a building off an alleyway. And I was with a big guy named Skip, and he was on the nozzle, and I was right behind. And it was the typical sort of fire. It was smoky, it was hot, and all of a sudden, there was an explosion. And Skip and I were blown backwards, my mask was knocked sideways, and there was this moment of confusion. And then I picked myself up, I groped for the nozzle, and I did what a firefighter was supposed to do. I lunged forward, opened up the water, and I tackled the fire myself. The explosion had been caused by a water heater, so nobody was hurt, and ultimately it was not a big deal. But later, Skip came up to me and said, "Nice job, Caroline," in this surprised sort of voice. And I was confused because the fire hadn't been difficult physically, so why was he looking at me with something like astonishment? And then it became clear. Skip, who was, by the way, a really nice guy and an excellent firefighter, not only thought that women could not be strong, he thought that they could not be brave either. And he wasn't the only one. Friends, acquaintances, and strangers, men and women throughout my career asked me over and over, "Caroline, all that fire, all that danger, aren't you scared?" Honestly, I never heard a male firefighter ask this. And I became curious. Why wasn't bravery expected of women? Now, the answer began to come when a friend of mine lamented to me that her young daughter was a big scaredy cat. And so I began to notice. And yes, the daughter was anxious. But more than that, the parents were anxious. Most of what they said to her when she was outside began with, "Be careful, watch out," or "no." Now, my friends were not bad parents. They were just doing what most parents do, which is cautioning their daughters much more than they caution their sons. There was a study involving a playground fire pole, ironically, in which researchers saw that little girls were very likely to be warned by both their moms and dads about the fire pole's risk. And if the little girl still wanted to play on the fire pole, a parent was very likely to assist her. But the little boys, they were encouraged to play on the fire pole, despite any trepidations that they might have. And often the parents offered guidance on how to use it on their own. So what message does this send to both boys and girls? Well, that girls are fragile and more in need of help, and that boys can and should master difficult tasks by themselves. It says that girls should be fearful and boys should be gutsy. Now, the irony is that at this young age, girls and boys are actually very alike physically. In fact, girls are often stronger until puberty and more mature. And yet we adults act as if girls are more fragile and more in need of help, and they can't handle as much. This is the message that we absorb as kids, and this is the message that fully permeates as we grow up. We women believe it, men believe it, and guess what? As we become parents, we pass it on to our children, and so it goes. Well, so now I had my answer. This is why women, even fire women, were expected to be scared. This is why women often are scared. Now, I know some of you won't believe me when I tell you this, but I am not against fear. I know it's an important emotion, and it's there to keep us safe. But the problem is when fear is the primary reaction that we teach and encourage in girls whenever they face something outside their comfort zone. So I was a paraglider pilot for many years. And a paraglider is a parachute-like wing, and it does fly very well. But to many people, I realize it looks just like a bed sheet with strings attached. And I spent a lot of time on mountaintops inflating this bed sheet, running off and flying. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, "Caroline, a little fear would make sense here." And you're right, it does. I assure you, I did feel fear. But on that mountaintop, waiting for the wind to come in just right, I felt so many other things too. Exhilaration, confidence. I knew I was a good pilot. I knew the conditions were good, or I wouldn't be there. I knew how great it was going to be, 1,000 feet in the air. So, yes, fear was there, but I would take a good hard look at it, assess just how relevant it was, and then put it where it belonged, which was more often than not behind my exhilaration, my anticipation, and my confidence. So I'm not against fear. I'm just pro-bravery. Now, I'm not saying your girls must be firefighters or that they should be paragliders, but I am saying that we are raising our girls to be timid, even helpless. And it begins when we caution them against physical risk. The fear we learn and the experiences we don't stay with us as we become women and morph into all those things that we face and try to shed. Our hesitation in speaking out, our deference so that we can be liked, and our lack of confidence in our own decisions. So how do we become brave? Well, here's the good news. Bravery is learned. And like anything learned, it just needs to be practiced. So first, we have to take a deep breath and encourage our girls to skateboard, climb trees, and clamber around on that playground fire pole. This is what my own mother did. She didn't know it then, but researchers have a name for this. They call it risky play. And studies show that risky play is really important for kids, all kids, because it teaches hazard assessment, it teaches delayed gratification, it teaches resilience, it teaches confidence. In other words, when kids get outside and practice bravery, they learn valuable life lessons. Second, we have to stop cautioning our girls willy-nilly. So notice next time you say, watch out, you're going to get hurt, or don't do that, it's dangerous. And remember that often what you're really telling her is that she shouldn't be pushing herself, that she's really not good enough, that she should be afraid. Third, we women have to start practicing bravery too. We cannot teach our girls until we teach ourselves. So here's another thing. Fear and exhilaration feel very similar. The shaky hands, the heightened heart rate, the nervous tension. And I'm betting that for many of you, the last time you thought you were scared out of your wits, you may have been feeling mostly exhilaration. And now you've missed an opportunity. So practice. And while girls should be getting outside to learn to be gutsy, I get that adults don't want to get on hoverboards or climb trees. So you guys we all should be practicing at home, in the office, and even right here, getting up the guts to talk to someone that you really admire. Finally, when your girl is, let's say, on her bike on the top of a steep hill that she insists she's too scared to go down, guide her to access her bravery. Ultimately, maybe that hill really is too steep, but she'll come to that conclusion through courage, not fear. Because this is not about the steep hill in front of her. This is about the life ahead of her, and that she has the tools to handle and assess all the dangers that we cannot protect her from, all the challenges that we won't be there to guide her through, everything that our girls here and around the world face in their future. So by the way, the world record for crawling today is 35.18 miles. And I would really love to see a girl go break that.
Wow, such a great advice in that video. I don't know about you, but I'm not yet ready to go crawling or paragliding. But I'm definitely inspired to step out of my comfort zone and take risks, and I hope you will too. So our next speaker is Eden Dayatovic. Eden Teodorovich, oh shoot, Eden Teodorovich, Eden Teodorovich, oh shoot, what it? Yeah, okay, Eden Teodorovich. Oh well, she's an amazing young woman, and she is a freshman at the University of Johns Hopkins University. She's pursuing a major in environmental science and a minor in business. She is incredibly well-rounded. She enjoys weightlifting and gardening when she isn't working in her community to serve her community. But honestly, I don't know when that is because she's so engaged in helping others. Eden is the former chairperson of the Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council. She was the founder of Benefit Buckets and also the founder of Mask for Me Project. Eden, in 2021, received Governor Hogan's Hometown Hero Service Award and also received the award from the United Nations Community Service Award, which led to her being featured in the Herald newspaper multiple times. So please welcome Eden to the stage. I don't say so. Oh, God.
Hi, everyone. Okay. It is in our nature as human beings to implement tools and craft tools into our daily lives. It's human to do this, and some would even say we're fundamentally lazy as we do anything to make our future tasks easier. But it is this optimization of our experiences that sets our species apart from all others. While our ancestors crafted tools with stones to have easier access to food, I crafted a unique and personal tool that helped me overcome seemingly perpetual hardships in my life. That tool is BRIGHT: balance, river, independence, and telescope. And I'll be taking you along the journey as I overcame that and discovered it. And I'll be starting this journey a little out of chronological order and in the least favorable part of high school for some: junior and senior year. Junior and senior year, I was in a toxic, unhealthy relationship. This person was utterly suffocating, demanding, controlling, and set unrealistic standards. I found myself going to extreme measures to satisfy this person, and it got to the point where my mental health was absolute chaos, and all I knew was stress. And now you're probably wondering, who would do this thing to such a poor girl? And you're looking right at her. I'm the culprit. I created such an intense and unsafe environment in my head where I could never escape the stress. But it was simply because I wanted the best for myself, and I knew that meant challenges. I developed an unhealthy relationship with challenging myself, assuming that the more difficult the challenge, the more rewarding, and the absolute maximum challenges, the better. And the detriment of this relationship crept slowly into my life, beginning with overloading my fall schedule senior year. On average, I'd start my days at 6 a.m. and end them at 2 a.m. the next day, starting with 7 classes and extra in the morning, to leading a community service organization, to leading a youth city council and 2 passion projects, to college applications, and to the heavy workload of the International Baccalaureate, or IB program. I rarely had time to spare, but somehow I was unstoppable. I maintained this high on productivity for months, and foolishly, I thought this would persist, but inevitably, I crashed, and as the spring and my 20-some IB final exams approached, my productivity and drive plummeted. My performance physically, academically, and mentally was at an all-time low, and I didn't recognize myself anymore. Where did the highly motivated, passionate, and focused Eden go? That was it. The fact that I didn't acknowledge the highly important correlation and causation between those features. You can't expect a reasonable supply of focus and drive without a reasonable dose of passion. That was the difference between my fall and spring. I absolutely loved and thrived in what I was doing, making a difference in my community through my organizations and projects, pursuing my career interests in sustainability, helping others through my leadership, having my voice heard, and having a high performance in physical activity. I was truly in a state of bliss and satisfaction. But it was this difference and the change that allowed me to maintain my drive and focus throughout the year. So I can't stress enough the importance to strike a balance in your passions and work or academic life. We all have these we have all of these high goals, like when we have that dream job in 10 years, and in hopes of seeking happiness whenever we attain them. But we tend to not account for the happiness in between the present and achieving those goals. And in between achieving those goals, that's when it's the most important. You're going to be alone in those times, and you're going to need that drive, and you're going to need someone to push you, and that's going to be yourself. So I challenge you to strike the balance between passion and work or academic life. And now the story will be rewinding to the dreadfully awkward transition into freshman year of high school. I entered my big 4 years with a plan that was so perfect. You know, the one where you never really consider anything going wrong because what could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out a lot. My plan was my goal and my dream was to play soccer, varsity soccer my freshman year, and in turn have a strong bond with my team and just generally have a community to fit in with, which had gone to shambles, and it was almost embarrassing how far reality deviated from my dream. How far reality had deviated from my dream. And freshman year, the summer before my freshman year, I suffered a physically debilitating broken ankle injury, and I'd soon learn how mentally debilitating it also was. Within weeks, my self-esteem had plummeted. I was more depressed and anxious than ever before, and this depression also magnified other issues like lack of motivation, isolation, and irritability, which only hindered my recovery journey. I was angry at life, angry at my long recovery journey ahead of me, angry at the universe for letting this happen to me, and angry at my not-so-perfect reality. I was grieving the loss of what felt like my social success and dreams in high school. My life was out of my control. And after my loved one suggested therapy, I felt the weight of stigma as I protested. Eventually I complied, but entered with a closed mind. I consider myself a pretty emotionally attuned and self-aware individual, so what does this person really have to offer to me? Well, one day her power struck me. One day, when I was complaining about what could have been without my ankle injury, she basically told me, Eden, you can't change the past, so why focus so much emotional and mental energy focusing on what could be, rather than to direct that towards your recovery and trying your best, because that's the only and best thing that you can do. And that sentence and that statement put the control of my life back into my hands. As simple and obvious as that statement is, try your best, that's the only and best thing you can do, it resonated intensely with me and lingered throughout my entire recovery journey. Feeling left out in the team, try your best to fit in. If you're scared to go through contact again, don't get in your own way. I was trying my best, and that's the only thing that I could do. And that's where River comes in. And as cliche as it may sound, I needed to go with the flow. You can't change the past, and, the injuries inflicted upon you. But you can change the direction in which you go. And that's going with the current, not against it. And as the Dutch motivational speaker Wim Hof stated, life is like a river. The way of life is to flow with the current. To turn against it takes effort. But the current will carry you if you let it. And this whole time, I was going against it. But eventually, I did what Wim Hof said, and I went with the current, and it carried me into 2 severe concussions my sophomore and junior year. Now, brain injuries are challenging in ways intensely unlike physical injuries. With injuries like a ACL tear or broken ankle, you have a reasonably predictable timeline in recovery. But with your unique and precious brain, recovery is frightening and unknown. You look normal on the outside, no crutches or brace, but you're a completely different person on the inside. And I felt the gravity of my injury whenever I was visiting my neuropsychologist at St. Jude's Research Hospital in Washington, D.C. I was performing manageable tests, but this whole time I was trying to convince myself the mildness of my brain damage. So I felt like a lab subject or an alien in a sterile white room with a scientist at the end of the table asking you questions. And so I got this, right? I had always taken the most challenging and high-level courses in school offered to me, so simple problems couldn't beat me. They rarely did. But then the doctor gave me a simple elementary multiplication problem. My mind began racing in nothingness. Like a car in intense fog, I couldn't orient myself. I couldn't coordinate my logic to solve this simple math problem. And eventually, I broke into tears, sobbing, a complete mental breakdown over a simple elementary math problem. It was so hard for myself to watch me become so weak mentally. My logic, cognitive abilities, emotional intelligence were my most prized possessions, features that I unapologetically took pride in and optimized. And to have this stripped from me was utterly defeating. These were seemingly undetachable features from me, and they were stripped. And when they were stripped from me, I was then grieving the loss of myself. This logic and intelligence made me who I was in the classroom and on the soccer field. And to no longer have that, once again, was utterly defeating. But I knew better than to dwell on what could have been and dwell on the past. And I went with the flow. The river carried me, and I took this logic and I tried my best. And I went with the current of life. And I sorry. I went with the flow of life. And although you can't change what could have been, or the injuries and brain damage inflicted upon myself, I could change the path of my journey. And that was from being negative and resistant to being positive, accepting, and resilient. And so, whenever you take this approach, you can bounce back and life can be more enjoyable. And so when you go with the flow, you need to trust it, and it'll take you through some bends and curves, but it will only do that to show you beautiful and shaping experiences. And through this, life can be so much more enjoyable. And throughout these adversities and obstacles in life, we often refer to the support and comfort of our friends, family, peers, and loved ones. And I did as well, and I valued these. And it's important to get comfort from others like friends. But it was when I removed these friends and these close individuals from my life due to toxicity, I realized how weak my relationship was with myself. When I didn't have anyone to walk in the halls with, to eat lunch with, or do study dates with, I realized how uncomfortable I was in my own presence. I didn't know what to do with myself. And so when I was forced to be alone in solidarity, I learned a little bit about myself. I learned that I'm my #1 comedian, and no one can make me laugh as much as myself. And I also learned what makes me happy, and what makes me feel the most like myself the most, and how to handle emotions of mine. So this is where independence comes into play. This independence was empowering and evoked the evolution of myself mentally. I was able to conquer tasks in solidarity, and I wasn't a loser or anything, you know. I fought the stigma of being, alone. If anything, I think that made me pretty cool, because who wouldn't want to be around someone who's so secure in themselves and who enjoys their own time as much as they do with others? I mean, that's my kind of person, but. So I just challenge you, next time, whenever you're looking for someone, when you're doing something, do it by yourself. Whenever you accomplish things by yourself, your self-reliance and self-respect and sense of accomplishment becomes much stronger, and you get to know yourself a little more. So I challenge you to learn through yourself and become your best friend through independence. And so, as I've been talking about strengthening that relationship in your head and having a stronger mental state, we can sometimes become trapped within it. With our thoughts spiraling and we're focusing on so many minor details, it can become overwhelming and almost paralyzing. But this is where telescope comes in. Through telescope, I realize that when we zoom out, we can realize the details and we can get clues to help us throughout these solutions. We can allocate all this mental energy and time more effectively and not just dwelling on the minor details, and allocate them towards making our solution easier. And so, when we zoom out, we realize that our situation might not be so bad. And while I realize that, throughout my brain damage, the paralyzing frustration of that, whether it's college applications or, changes to my social life, I zoomed out and I went with the flow as well. And so, as daunting as this sounds, we may, throughout these adversities and obstacles in our life, we might find ourselves alone. So it's essential to have an effective tool like Bright to help guide you through those journeys. And obstacles come and go. They oscillate in your life like a cosine function. And you can tell I recovered from my concussions because I can tell you about a cosine function. So as we go through obstacles in life, and as I will continue to go through obstacles in my life, I will carry this tool with me, and I encourage you to either find your own or use mine to then find your own as well. So I challenge you to be bright, think bright, and live in a bright world. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that deserves a bigger round of applause. Stand up and give Eden Teodovich a round of applause. Yeah. So thank you so much, Eden, and thank you all for being here as we support our speakers as they share their stories and move us for sure. I want to say the wisdom from young women and from older women is what this event is all about. It is now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker today, Councilwoman TEDxHagerstownWomen Martinez. She was elected in 2020 to the Hagerstown City Council, and she's a mother and a grandmother, an accomplished poet and community peace builder. She's an art instructor at the Museum of Fine Arts, encouraging young artists through primed and polished portfolio classes. TEDxHagerstown currently spends her time now split between her public service and working as a program manager for a local recovery center. She's a professionally trained mediator, facilitator, and consultant for restorative justice. And she's passionate about working to create safe places where healing can happen. And a fun fact about TEDxHagerstown Martinez is she was the Poet Laureate for Prime Time for Women, so it's a special pleasure to welcome her to the stage. Okay, got him.
Right from the beginning, I felt the need to nurture my seeds as they grew in my tummy. I doubled my intake of strength, made sure to take my daily vitamin of faith. Through me, they were receiving their first taste of life, so I was careful to only consume things that were right. And the moment that they entered the world, I fed them double bottles of love. And as they grew, I spoon-fed them trust. I kept them close in the early years, wiping their mouths as they purged up their fears. I filled them back up with persistence and contentment, and they grew from infants to tiny children. My mental feedings consisted of creativity with a side of beauty and a helping of unity. They were born royalty, so I fed them like queens. I was scared that someone would try to feed them pieces of negativity, so I made them eat extra pieces of peace after I handpicked out the contamination of greed. And they grew, got bigger, much quicker. Sometimes I had to mix up a stew that was thicker. Had to make sure it would stick to their ribs. Sometimes I had to force feed my kids confident soup. Ingredients would include beauty, bravery, and gratitude. And I'd whip up discipline with forgiveness mixed in. Bake a bread of patience and butter it with focus. I fed my kids healthy to fill them up with kindness, patience, wisdom, and more love. I baked them desserts mixed with compassion and hope. I wanted them full with all the nutrients needed to cope, and they loved my pie filled with humbleness inside. But just before I laid them down to rest, I made sure they had their taste of perseverance and silence, and my self-grown metaphorical herbs as I softly spoke over and over the same words. You can be anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. I seasoned their dreams with belief. So when they'd wake up, they believe dreams don't just take place in your sleep. They are within your reach. And they'd wake up thirsty, so I had to let them sip on reality. Had to let them know that bad things are supposed to happen. But just in case from somewhere they got a taste of hate, I kept a laxative of understanding close by to minimize the pain. So I've always been a dreamer. It's pretty easy for me to do. I don't think that I realized that daydreaming, losing myself in books, or writing for hours and hours was a response to trauma. I didn't realize that until 17 years old. I was a foster care student, in foster care, I'm sorry. And I had my oldest daughter, and while I was in foster care. So we were both wards of the state. I didn't have an identity. I liked to write, I could dream. I always knew that there was something big on the inside of me. I woke up 25, 5 children, 4 different fathers, 4 of them all in prison all at the same time. At one point in time, homeless, disturbed, traumatized, hurt, unheard, broken, and frustrated. But there was something deep down on the inside of me And I kept responding when I was triggered. And I kept responding with the only thing that trauma trained me to do, retreat. I've always been a dreamer. I could get lost easy. I could be standing right here in front of you. I'm here right now, you guys. I'm present. But just so you know, I could be standing in front of you. I could be on the phone with you and not even be there. Very gifted that I could jump back in the conversation as if I was listening. Just gone. Moments just gone. And I'm going to rush through this because this is how my life felt to me. It felt like things were just rushed. I felt like I just woke up and here I am. I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up and here I am in another situation. It seemed like no matter how hard I tried to be the light, no matter how much I poured into my children, no matter how much all hell continued to break loose, and I kept responding the only way I knew how to, the way that trauma had trained me. I retreat. I check out. I get low. But you have 4 daughters, and all of y'all are scared of everything. Everything. Somebody had to be brave. So I had to go from being a dreamer to a doer. I had to figure it out because I had these little people that were looking at me to be an example. And I had taught them how to love education. I had taught them how to be quiet in the library because I love to read. And if you got 4 daughters, and I don't know if you've met my daughters, but their personalities are huge. And if you got 4 daughters that are constantly talking, the best place to take them is to the library. I taught them how to love to read too, so that I can continue to escape. I realized that I needed to show them how to go from being a dreamer to a doer, how to confront this conflict that was within. And the conflict that was within, I was conflicted with who trauma trained me to be and who God created me to be. And it was an issue. It was a real battle going on inside. A lot of times people would misunderstand the look on my face, not realizing that I was fighting literal hell to be present because I could check out. I could say nothing. I've always been a dreamer. Needing to instill into my daughters the importance of being able to advocate for yourself, to be able to speak for yourself, to be able to love yourself. How could I do that? How could I possibly mentally feed them specific things that I myself, I had no idea. There's parts of my life that I do not remember. I don't remember. I think that's my hair, you guys, I'm sorry. There's parts of my life that I do not remember. I believe that trauma trained me to pack it up, put it in a box, and store it away so that I could show back up, whether it was for my children or for the people in my life, my siblings. I needed to show back up. And so I packed things away. I stored them away. I got lost, and I just kept pouring into them. I had no idea who I was. No idea. No idea what my favorite color was. I had no idea what I liked to do. I had no idea. I had no identity. A ward of the state until 18 years old. And that was the only identity that I had been left with these 4 little girls, and something had to shift. So I started hosting and producing open mics. And I'll tell you, the first time that I hosted, I sat behind the DJ, and I read the poem, and I was shaking, literally shaking, crying, shaking. I did not want to do it. However, I needed to show my daughters that there was something that was bigger on the inside of all of us, and if I would go first, they could follow. So I went from hosting open mics to teaching workshops to volunteering. The more it hurt, the more I served. The more all hell broke loose, the more I served. Because what do you do whenever you're going through so much? You now have teenage daughters. You're now back in your hometown where you were born and raised. Your family is still there, and nobody's understanding the pain on the inside. What do? The more it hurt, the more I served. But guess what? The more I served, the more I learned. The more I showed up, the more I learned the importance and the power in being present and being on purpose. I learned that from serving. So I became a community mediator. It was one of the best things that happened to my life. I remember the position not being something that I would want to do. Who wants to sit in between conflict for a living when you've been trained by trauma to check out the moment conflict is happening, unless it was time to fight? Unless it was time to fight. So how could I possibly sit in between somebody else's conflict, hear and understand them, and then walk away and still feel whole? How was I going to be able to do that? I tell you, it took a lot of practice. It also took therapy. Therapy is important. No matter how much you are trained, no matter how much you are taught, if you don't begin to process what has happened to you, it will just be tucked away. It will be tucked away somewhere. I came home the day after that I got elected, and my best friend had sent me flowers. I hated flowers. I thought I hated flowers. She sent me flowers, and I smelled them, and I was like, oh my gosh. It reminded me of a time that I was in an infant maternity home. It reminded me of that moment, and that's another thing that being traumatized will do. Certain smells, certain sounds will take you back to a place. This was a place that reminded me of where I got the essence and the seeds to mentally be able to feed my children. And so I stand before you today as a dreamer, a doer, and an encourager. I stand before you today as a poet, a grandmother, and a nan. Also, a politician. Where in the world? I never imagined that I would be into politics. I never imagined being standing here. Actually, I failed public speaking twice at HCC. I never imagined it. But trauma had trained me to trek out when it got hard. And what I realized that I needed to be intentional with my time. I needed to be intentional with my moves. The more uncomfortable it got, the more I showed up. The more it hurt, the more I kept going, the more I loved. And so I just challenge you. I challenge you that if you are trained by trauma, forgive. Forgive like it's a prerequisite for healing. Because the only way that you can be healed and whole is if you forgive. And forgiveness has to happen constantly. Many offenses will come. I tell you, as a politician, in my hometown, born and raised, where every system that was supposed to keep me safe, I was traumatized by, I am constantly triggered and re-traumatized. If you see my face, I'm like this. If I'm stuttering, it's because I'm misfiring. I'm trying to not check out and stay present. I'm attempting to be present and just please remember that. Remember that we all have traumas. We all have been through things. Give each other a little grace. Wait before you run up on somebody and tell them your problems. You have no idea what their battle was the night before. Just pause for a minute. Pause. Because see, sometimes I spend time hiding to escape. The liars, deniers, sideliners, and those aspiring to be the next headliner. I hide deep while they seek. I go deep, so deep the finder would have to dig in their mental just to reach. In this mental game of hide and seek, I lay low, turn off my firefly glow, take a mental rest, lay back, and rehearse how I plan to articulate my most profound words. I let adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and verbs play a part in my poetic verse. Inject a selection of propositions, conjunctions, and interjections in just the right place for verbal perfection. Then I come out and re-say in a different way what I wanted to say, like, hey, yo, Hagerstown women, I'm right here. I'm on your side like we Siamese. It's time to reveal the real, remove the mask, no more boundaries. I write to get closer to me, poetic proximity. I write to get closer to you, and you can always keep your sympathy. Because I'll put you poetically in God's garden of words and make you peep his scenery. Take this glass filled with my lyrical symphony, hope it contagiously tickle your fancy. And you get addicted like my addiction to my pens. Get right within. Poetry is my breath. and I don't waste it on frivolous debating. So when I'm not speaking, it's always just another breath waiting. Trained by trauma, forgive and heal. Thank you.
So thank you, Councilwoman Martinez, for speaking your truth, for educating us, for empowering us, and for moving us forward with your passion. Can you just feel the energy in this room? I mean, this is amazing. I want to say that this event would not have happened today without the support and help of so many people. So I want to thank, first of all, the Kepler Theater technicians, Jason Berman, Ryan Edwards, and Jason Kelly. Thank you so much. They managed the production today, and they met many hours of time planning and working with the TEDxHagerstownWomen coordination team. And right now, I'd like to recognize those women who planned this event. Beth Harvey, Barb Martin, Shade Paul, Jessica Scott, and Melissa Wilder, and of course, all our volunteers. I'd also like to thank those sponsors who supported today's historic event the first time, and I hope it's just the very first time of many. I'd like to thank Michelle King, who designed and created their stage that made it a welcoming, safe place for us to gather today. And we are grateful to her creative energies. I'd also like to thank Hagerstown College President, Dr. James Klauber, and the board, and for allowing us to use this beautiful Kepler Theater. And thank you to our advisory team. Please join me in a round of applause for all those who made today possible. As we close today's historic event, I invite you to join me and our fabulous speakers in the lobby for a networking reception and a lunch served by Lighters Fine Catering. We hope you enjoyed today. We thank you for joining us in this new era, this era of dreamers, doers, and encouragers. Please let me say that we look forward to finding out how today's event impacted your life and see the impact you make in our community. Thanks so much.